Well, hey there, you're on the internet, I'm unemployed, and welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you newbie nib nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at an ink now, shall we? Today's ink is Noodler's Turquoise, which is actually one of two inks that I generally keep in this pen. This is my Edison Menlo. Has a custom ground 1.1 millimeter stub. And part of why I usually keep it in this pen is because, first of all, it looks great sloshing around inside. Might not be able to see that, but also because it's in a stub nib, it really highlights those qualities that generally make people like stub nibs when they like stub nibs. It helps highlight the wet areas versus the dry areas, the thick strokes versus the thin strokes, and gives great shading, great contrast, and has some great personality to it, because as a turquoise ink, it's not just blue, it's not just red, it's not just green, it's not just purple. It's a little bit blue, it's a little bit dark blue, it's a little bit light blue, and like here you can see some of this green. And so here's the chromatography, and as you might be able to tell, there's some potential for water resistance, not a lot, but some, and it's in there. So start at the top. 90 gram per square meter Clairefontaine paper. It is fairly dense, however, it does beautifully bring out the shading in this ink, as you can see. Sorry if I'm making you motion sick. But also not very good at resisting water, though at this angle you might be able to tell the paper actually started to come apart, and the places where the paper came apart is actually where it's hardest to read it. So it was in there pretty good once I let it dry, but most of it still came off. Then we've got Rhodia, which is 80 grams per square meter, also great shading. The dry time was pretty good on this. It was 11 seconds. This can be a slower drying ink. Not the worst I've seen by far, but I'd say if 5 out of 10 is average, this one's probably a 6. So just a touch on the longer side. And here I tried to write just a little bit finer in case there are people out there who have microphasia and, you know, wanted to be able to see if they could read it if it was really tiny. You can kind of read it. Yeah, you know, if you had to read it and you sat down and really stared at it, you could recover some of that. Next is Mead notebook paper. There was bleeding. However, it didn't render the next page unusable. It just rendered the back of this one pretty unpleasant. There was no shading. There was a little bit of feathering, but it was occasional. It was where it was absolutely at its wettest. There was some spread. The water test was pretty bad, but you know, it's kind of readable if you have larger handwriting. It was a bit explosive, but it did resist a bit. Then we've got 20-pound copy paper, where there was great shading, I thought. Here, let's... Like in the turquoise, you see some of that great shading. In the quick brown fox, you see it very well. The water test was not as good as I thought it would be. I found that a lot of times it's harder to get ink to wash off of this copy paper. So when it did this badly, I was actually kind of surprised. But yeah, I think it's a good combo in this ink, in a stub nib, on 20-pound copy paper. I think it does pretty well. You've still got character, you don't have feathering or bleed or spread. Pretty good combination. And then lastly, got Moleskine paper, where there was bleed, and with the water there was terrible, terrible bleed. And there was some feathering, but it didn't make it painful to read. And there was spread, but it didn't completely undo all of the characteristics that having a stub nib brings to the table. So there's that. However, this water test, like as you can tell, like it completely changes the topography of the paper. So that was pretty bad. However, it was the most readable. It was very expansive, but it was the most readable, so there was that. It did retain shading, and there was good dry time, so I'd say that there was that, but not ideal. I'd call it the lesser of two evils. If that was if it was between using a rollerball and using this ink on Moleskine paper, I'd use this because I hate rollerballs, and it actually did pretty okay. So that's my review of Noodler's Turquoise, and in this beautiful Menlo by Edison Pens. And hope you have a good day, and so long from the Triple N Network. Bye-bye.